Brian Lehrer on WNYC, what people are calling a romance slump among Gen Z. From 1980 to 2022, the share of 25 to 34-year-olds who are married or living with a partner dropped by almost 10 percentage points among college graduates and more than 20 points among people without a college degree. And it's not necessarily because people don't want relationships. A majority of single young adults say they do want a long-term partner. But why are fewer people finding one? There are lots of possible contributing factors: dating apps, changing gender expectations, economic instability, the decline of some of the places where people used to meet and build community. Our guest is Faith Hill, a staff writer at The Atlantic, who recently took a deep dive into what she calls the great romance slump. Hi, Faith. Welcome back to WNYC.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me.
And listeners, I want to open up the phones and our text thread right away on this. Are you seeing a change in how people your age approach dating and relationships compared to maybe your older siblings or your parents? 212-433-WNYC. If you're single, do you want to be in a relationship, or are you happy with your life as it is without one? And if you do want to be in a relationship, how do you meet people, and what are your non-negotiables? And for parents of Gen Z and younger millennials who are also in this boat, how does your children's approach to romance compare with your own? And do you think that they're happy? And what do you think they need? 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. Call or text. Faith, I gave some of the stats at the beginning, but how else basically would you characterize the romance slump?
Yeah, so of course romance is a very broad umbrella term, but all these different kinds of forms of romance seem to be on the decline around the same time. So, a shrinking share of young adults have a steady partner. In 2019, 42% of single adults younger than 40 told Pew Research Center that they'd never been in a committed relationship. And, a lot of single people say in surveys that they rarely or never go on dates. People are having less sex, too. So there's, a lot of sort of different kinds of signals of something happening.
How much of this would you attribute to changing gender roles over time? Like even I saw one article, I think that was in response to the same trend, that said, why are fewer women getting married? Because they don't have to. Right.
I think it's part of the story, not the whole story. I talked to lots of people for this article, some straight, some queer, and a lot of people were frustrated with dating, but I did find that talking to people who were, looking for a straight partnership, there was this kind of simmering gender resentment. A lot of men were kind of feeling inadequate and a little bit resentful about that. Like the standards have kind of changed in a way that I think can be confusing for men. It used to be just that, men were expected to be breadwinners, but now fewer men are earning college degrees. The economy has moved away from stable blue-collar jobs. Everything is expensive. It's just very difficult for men to support a partner or a family on their own. But the new standards can also feel out of reach. I think a lot of women are really looking for communication and sensitivity and openness and these skills that a lot of boys are not taught from a young age. And sometimes all of those expectations can kind of exist at once. So I talk to a lot of men who feel like they're trying to do all of that. And, at the same time, I think a lot of women are feeling really fed up. They've had bad experiences. And a lot of them also just know kind of the broader context that they're living and dating in. They know that women tend to do much more of the domestic labor in a partnership, even when they're the breadwinner. So they're sort of thinking realistically about whether they'll find a man who supports them, who, would do an equal share of childcare if they had a kid together. And
so you've just given a really good description of why both parties, meaning men and women, might be wary in terms of heterosexual relationships. What about in queer relationships?
I think when I talk to queer people, there was a lot of frustration about how to meet people, about the dating apps. I think that is really a context that affects a lot of single people right now. And I think the one thing that stood out to me about that is that, people don't necessarily need romance in the same way that they used to, and that is a great thing. I think there's been, singlehood has kind of been destigmatized to a degree, but the combination of needing romance less and dating being hard means it's so easy for it to get kind of bumped to the bottom of the to-do list. People used to meet partners more often just in everyday life, and that can be harder to do now for a lot of reasons, including that dating apps have just kind of become the norm. But making time in your schedule to meet a stranger that you met online can be pretty unappealing, and it means stepping away from other things. So there's just kind of a lot of fatigue and pessimism.
I think Nico in Manhattan wants to enter on about that point. Nico, you're on WNYC. Thank you for calling in.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me. I think specifically with people my age, the prevalence of dating apps is insane, and it's really contributed to the gamification of dating, and it's more so quantity over quality, and everybody just trying to build up a roster rather than take the time to really get to know a person, which I think is a major contributor to the decline of true romance.
Faith?
I think that sounds right to me, and I've talked to so many people who feel that way. I think it's, a lot of people are sort of simultaneously they're part of the gamification. Like, they know they're swiping and then forgetting to respond to people, and they're also hurt by people doing it to them. And I think it's difficult when it feels hard to meet people in person. It feels like that's not, it's not normal anymore to strike up conversation with strangers. There's this weird thing going on where people are so resentful of the apps, but also feel stuck with them.
Listener writes, romance in this economy? You address that in your article.
Yes, I do. I think that's a really big part of this. And, it's connected to the point about online dating kind of meaning that you need to step away from the rest of your life and your other priorities in order to find love. That is just harder to do if you are worried about making rent or, what shifts you'll be picking up the next week. A lot of people are really worried about finding financial stability, and romance is just, not the thing that they feel like they can put first right now. And it used to be, sort of more common to think of partnership as sort of a savvy financial decision. You might find a partner and then work towards stability together. But researchers now call marriage kind of a capstone. People often feel that they need to get their life in order, save up, build a career before they find a partner and prioritize that. But those milestones are harder to reach now. Job security is scarcer, so are sort of stable hours. So it's difficult to get to that place and to feel like tying your livelihood to someone else's is a benefit rather than just a liability.
Here's a pair of texts, maybe opposite of each other. One says, thank you for this topic. I am the parent of 2 college-age Gen Z girls who would love nothing more than to have boyfriends. They find it very hard to find boys who are interested in having real conversations, much less dating. They just keep trying, but it's very hard. And maybe even in the context of that, another listener writes, so far, everything you're saying, could have been said in the 1980s after the Women's Revolution. Does she have a new assessment to make?
Yeah, I think that a lot of these changes have been brewing for a long time, but they can kind of be intensifying at the same time. There are a lot of signs, for instance, that sort of this gender resentment and misogyny is kind of growing among young men. There are a lot of women who told me, they know that there are men who are listening to these manosphere influencers who The one professor told me that a lot of her students have brothers who are listening to Andrew Tate. And, she was saying if you know that your brother is feeling this way about women, why would you want to trust a stranger from an app? So I do think there's, just a lot of rising distrust and instability, ways that the economy is even more precarious now. So these changes kind of build.
You also write in your article about the loss of serendipitous encounters, right? The ways people used to meet through school, work, friends, or community. And yet we have another text that says, moonlight as a bartender a night or two a week, you'll never be lonely. So is there really that much less in-person encountering? Obviously, it's the digital age, but people still go to school, people still go to work. People still have hobbies that they do in teams or whatever.
Right. I mean, absolutely, people still meet in person. It's very much still possible, and it happens. But at the same time, there are real changes. A lot of people are working remotely. There have been big increases in people, ordering in food. And I think a lot of people are, spending more time kind of at home, streaming Netflix. And then when you do go out, the cultural norms really change how you might feel about approaching a stranger. I know a lot of people who feel like they don't even feel that setups are normal among friends anymore. So it happens, but I do think these cultural changes can kind of add up.
Pedro in Soho had an interesting point, but he just disappeared off our board. So let me ask you this. You note in your article that this isn't just an American phenomenon, and you looked at declining marriage rates around the world. So what did looking globally tell you about what's universal here and what's specifically American?
Right. Well, I think, I talked to two anthropologists who wrote a book about this, happening in different countries called Opting Out. And they had found all of these different examples across the world where, marriage rates were declining. And often the kind of connecting factor, though the contexts were very different, were kind of the shifting gender norms and relations that I mentioned before. So a lot of women feeling like they were unsure of the point of marrying, this sort of shortage of marriageable men, as some sociologists put it. And I think that looks very different in different countries. And what one of those anthropologists told me was that in the U.S. context, she's worried that something that's unique here is that single people are often encouraged to prioritize career or kind of wellness, self-actualization instead of romance. And those are very much individual pursuits. So, in Botswana, for instance, there were these big networks of women raising children together. And I think in the U.S., single people haven't necessarily found those ways to kind of replace what romance used to give with these other meaningful communal pursuits. And that's sort of part of the concern. I think it's very much a positive thing if romance can be decentered in a way where there's more choices for how to live a good life. But the question is just what's going to replace partnership for people.
One more text that maybe encapsulates a lot of the dilemma that you've been pointing out. Give me a reaction to this. Listener writes, I got burned out by dating apps 2 years ago. Haven't had sex in 3 years. I think the standards have gotten higher, but despite being in my late 30s and still living at home, I still crave a romantic connection. So you have that craving, but at the same time, that burnout, and it doesn't sound like they're actively looking.
Right. This is such an interesting kind of ambivalence that I found again and again when I was reporting this piece. I think it's absolutely a good thing that people can live without partnership now, and it means that a lot more people will. They won't settle for a partnership they don't feel strongly about when they can have a meaningful life without it. But at the same time, then going without it when deep down you really do want partnership can leave this very real sense of loss that I think we also need to acknowledge.
Let me throw in one more that just came in. We've only got less than a minute, but listener writes, I wonder how much the first couple of years of COVID impacted how a certain segment of Gen Z, especially those who are in what would be traditionally prime dating periods of high school and college. Quick take on that?
Absolutely. I mean, there's documentation of this pandemic dating recession where, the number of single adults in the U.S. rose from by about 5% from 2017 to 2022, partly because young people just weren't as meeting as frequently as before, and also because, they're rusty on these social skills. Dating is hard already, and it's harder if you've been isolated.
Faith Hill, staff writer at The Atlantic, her new piece is called The Great Romance Slump. Faith, thanks for sharing it with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that's The Brian Lehrer Show, produced by Lisa Allison, Mary Croak, Amina Cerna, Carl Boisrond, and Esperanza Rosenbaum, with help from Sasha Linden Cohen and Melanie Marich today. Stay tuned for Allison.